Most originate the theory that Jesus was a Palestinian with the former Palestinian Authority chairman. Most of you will remember and recognize his name, Yasser Arafat. And he was not only the Palestinian Authority chairman, he was, and I know this is going to trigger people, but he was a terrorist, and he backed terrorism. And he was the one who began to really propel this statement that Jesus was Palestinian as a political talking point back in 2006. So if in your discussions or in your debates or perhaps even in Bible studies or in your churches, if you run into Christians who have fallen prey to the perverted facts and history and twisting of the Bible, and they're trying to convince you that Jesus was Palestinian, and the question is asked, well, where did this all begin? You can just simply say, Yasser Arafat, who was the former Palestinian Authority chairman in 2006, is most often credited with creating what he obviously used for a political talking point and a fundraising point. Jesus was Palestinian. Now, I will answer in just a moment why he did it, why those, I believe, in modern times continue to use it. I will be answering why I feel that they're doing so. But those who declare that Jesus was a Palestinian add to this a political talking point that takes it one bizarre step further. They not only will argue that Jesus was a Palestinian, they will go on to argue that Jesus was the first Palestinian martyr. And some of you that follow these types of subjects and are interested in Israel and Jewish history, I'm sure you're aware of that, but many will not. This year, here in the United States of America, we have, and I don't mean this to be mean-spirited, this is just factual information, but those of us that live in America, we are well aware of a group of female political voices and representatives who are anti-Semitic, to say the least. Some have gone as far as to say that they believe that the Jewish people should be wiped off of the face of the earth. And they are elected American politicians. And those of us that live in America, I'll not give their names. I don't even want to give credence to their hatred and their perversion of history and facts, not to mention their anti-Jesus, anti-Bible, anti-Christian views. But there are several female voices in the political circle that even as I speak are all over the news, all over Twitter, all over social media, continuing to pound the drum that Jesus was a Palestinian. And one went as far as to say that if Jesus were alive today, he would be fighting with Hamas. And I'll not go over the crazy things that are said, but I want you to know it's not just a small little unknown faction that believe this. It's major political voices, major social influencers, sadly, some notable Christian leaders, and voices that continue to pound the drum on the fact that Jesus was a Palestinian. Many of you would be familiar with Al Jazeera, The Independent, and those of us that live here in the United States of America, the New York Times, all of which in recent days have published articles defending the view that Jesus was a Palestinian. And when you have major news outlets around the world who give credence to this declaration that Jesus was Palestinian, the average person doesn't do their homework on it. They just assume that because Al Jazeera said it, or The Independent said it, or major political voices are saying it, and the New York Times and other liberal publications are all saying that Jesus was Palestinian, that there must be some truth to it. The New York Times published an article not long ago on the deep importance of the skin color of Jesus, stating, quote, Jesus, born in Bethlehem, was most likely a Palestinian man with dark skin. End of quote. That brings me to our second and last question in answering today in our study and in this video. Was Jesus a Palestinian? If you're taking notes, our last point, number 2, what is the goal of the argument that Jesus was a Palestinian? Many of you, perhaps like myself, I'm kind of a analysis, synthesis type of thinker. I don't want to just know what people believe. I want to know why. Even as a child growing up, my mom and dad in ministry, my dad has been with the Lord for almost 9 years. Many of you know that my 91-year-old mother passed away days ago. And because of the gospel, I'll meet them again. But growing up in a Christian home and my father being a pastor and being around the Bible and ministry my entire life did not keep me from getting to a point early in life, 10, 11, 12, in those years where my mind not only wanted to know what my parents believed and were teaching me, I wanted to know for myself, and I wanted to know why. I still have a mind that functions like that. And I also want to give people, regardless of what people's views are, I do my best to be gracious to people, and I believe in free speech. If you disagree, that doesn't mean that I hate you or I'm your enemy or vice versa. It shouldn't. And especially in the community of those who believe the Bible and consider themselves Christians, the Bible tells us we should be ready to defend what we believe and to give an answer. So let me conclude this video by answering the question, what is the goal of the argument that Jesus was a Palestinian? I'm going to state the obvious. Because it is historically and biblically inaccurate, it was, as I've already defined for you, a political talking point that was created by Yasser Arafat in 2006. And in 2023, it still is the same. It is a political talking point that is not factually accurate. And it is an anti-Israel political talking point. By trying to make people believe that Jesus was a Palestinian, those who hate Israel and the Jews further their goal to erase Jewish ties to the land of Israel and to disregard the divine statehood of Israel that was promised by God over 3,000 years ago. God promised Israel a land, a statehood, a prophetic promise given by God to Abraham that followed down through the generations. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, King David, on through Jesus. And even to this day, that promise is in the Bible, and it is a biblical and historic fact that dates back 3,000 years ago. There was no Palestine 3,000 years ago. As you're about to learn, there was no Palestine when Jesus walked the face of this earth. It is also a blatant attack when people say that Jesus was Palestinian. It's not only a political talking point by those who are anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Jew. anyone who declares that Jesus was a Palestinian is also anti-Bible, because the Bible presents Jesus not only as the only begotten Son of God, but the Bible presents Jesus as the promised Jewish Messiah. And he is also presented in the Bible and in Bible prophecy as the eternal Jewish king of Israel, who will sit on a throne forever established in Jerusalem. Those of you who follow our teaching, and as you well know, we spend a tremendous amount of time on our channel dealing with Bible prophecy, end-time events, final prophetic application, and so on. We have a lot of teaching on that. I hope you'll avail yourself to it. But Jesus will defeat of Bible prophecy. And the United Nations, as I speak, and not recently, it's been on their website for multiple years. It's called the 2030 Agenda. And the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations is the fulfillment of exactly what John wrote in Revelation 13 about those 5 political agendas that are already on this earth and are aggressively being pushed upon not only our nation, but around the world. Again, what are those 5 political agendas? A one world leader, the Bible calls him the Antichrist. A one world monetary system, the Bible speaks of the mark of the beast that will be placed on the back of the hand or upon the forehead, and without it, no one will be able to buy or to sell. A one world religion, and a one world military power that is going to enforce it. Listen to that video when you get a chance, because the declaration of Jesus being Palestinian fits into that false political global agenda that is trying to erase Israel, trying to erase Jews, trying to erase and demean Jewish history, and is anti-Bible and anti-history. The message of Jesus being Palestinian is just propaganda. And I know some of you won't like that, but that is just factually what it is, and historically as well. The chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat, tweeted a video days ago entitled, "Merry Palestinian Christmas." That was his tweet. Merry Palestinian Christmas, with a Palestinian saying that, and I quote from that video, Jesus was one of us. He's Palestinian. Jesus was one of us. He didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. He wasn't from Kentucky. He looked like DJ Khaled, minus 200 pounds. Mary, too, was a Palestinian. Mary's grandmother, a Palestinian. John the Baptist, St. George, the apostles, all Palestinians. End of quote. Now, every single word of that quote is historically a lie and is inaccurate and is nothing more than a perverted political piece of propaganda. And it's everywhere. Just because somebody says something and is emotional or passionate, including myself, it doesn't mean that it's accurate just because somebody's passionate or emotional or well-known. All truth must be built upon the foundation of God's eternal word. But even if you're listening and you're not a Christian, you don't need the Bible to prove that Jesus was not a Palestinian. A simple reading of history substantiates the absolute fact that Jesus was not a Palestinian. The simple truth is that activists are taking a relatively new name for this region, and I emphasize that. It's a relatively new name, Palestine, for that region, and placing it upon the ancient history of what we know to be true. Archaeology, genealogy, and history all prove conclusively that Jesus was born before there ever was a Palestine. Let me say that again, because that's incredibly important. And again, not my opinion, not my view. Do your own homework on this from a reputable historian, not someone with a political bias. But you will find that archaeology, genealogy, and history all prove that Jesus was born before there ever was a land called Palestine. When we go back to the birth of Jesus, it's essential that you understand the facts. In 132 CE, the current state of Israel was renamed Palestinia by the Romans, long after Christ had been born and long after his death. That land was never called Palestine in the times of Christ, in the times of Mary, his mother, in the times of his family, in the times of the apostles. It was first named Palestinia by the Romans. They did this to punish the Jews for the largest revolt against Rome by stripping them of their name in connection to Jerusalem and Judea, and they did it as a political spitting in their face, as the highest of insult, because by calling it Palestinia, they were naming it after the Philistines, who were the Jews' greatest enemies of that time that had conquered them. The use of even the earliest variants of Palestine began over 100 years after the birth of Christ. Now, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to say that again, and it's a gold nugget in this study that I think you should write down and have in your notes, because if you are ever confronted on this question, this one sentence is impossible to get by any intelligent, reasonable mind who's willing to accept the chronology of history. Let me say it again. The use of even the earliest variants of Palestine began over 100 years after the birth of Jesus Christ. So important, I'm going to say it again, because I just know that many of our faithful students are writing it down word for word, and I commend you if you're doing so. One more time, the use of even the variants of Palestine began over 100 years after the birth of Christ. How could Jesus be a Palestinian when there was no Palestine in his entire life? The term Palestine was unofficially used to describe land south of Syria by the Ottoman Empire in the 1500s. and was not even popular in the region and used by the people of that time. As a matter of fact, it was only after, listen carefully again for facts and history that's provable and authenticated, it was only after World War I that another occupying force, the British Empire, declared modern-day Israel and spoke of a landmass that was divided called Jordan and also Palestine. So basically, when it comes to a notable recognition of the term Palestine, we're coming into World War I, and Jesus obviously predated World War I. Just like the Romans, who were anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Jew, anti-Christ, the same spirit that caused the Romans to have hatred in their heart for the prophetic promises of God, the statehood of Israel, the promised Messiah, the Savior of the world. It is the same spirit today that tells us Jesus was a Palestinian. If you are, listen, if you are a believer, if you are a Bible-believing follower of Christ, to declare that Jesus was a Palestinian is not only an outright lie, it is an outright curse against God, against the statehood of Israel, against the name and the glory of Jesus Christ, against every Jew that walks the face of this earth. It is a dangerous thing to raise your voice against the promises of God and the history established not only by the Bible, but by genealogy, archaeology, and multiple records. Jesus was not Palestinian. He was the only begotten Son of God, the Savior of the world, a Jew by birth, a soon-coming King who will reign forever and forever, his throne established in Israel, specifically in Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, he will